I stood in the departure lounge of Chicago O'Hare International Airport, watching my family's retreating figures disappear around the corner toward Gate B-17, their laughter echoing off the polished floors as they headed to board the flight to Paris without me. My hands trembled as I clutched my phone, staring at the text message that had shattered my world just 20 minutes earlier. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sorry, Emma. Dad's company only covered 4 tickets. We'll send pictures from the Eiffel Tower. Mom, 4 tickets for what was supposed to be our family celebration trip to mark my graduation from Northwestern with my MBA. 4 tickets that apparently didn't include me, despite this entire vacation being planned around my achievement. I sank into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, my graduation gift luggage sitting mockingly beside me, packed for a week in Europe that would never happen. The worst part wasn't even being left behind. It was the casual cruelty of how it happened. My stepmother, Linda, had orchestrated this morning with surgical precision, insisting we all arrive together, checking in as a family, only to reveal at the last possible moment that there had been a miscommunication about the ticket count. My father, David, had stood there awkwardly, shuffling his feet while Linda explained how my step-siblings Ryan and Madison absolutely couldn't miss this opportunity, since they were starting their junior year abroad programs in the fall. Emma's so responsible, she'll understand, Linda had said with that saccharine smile I'd learned to despise over the past 5 years. Besides, she just finished business school. This could be a great networking opportunity for her right here in Chicago. I watched a family of tourists struggle with their oversized suitcases near the information desk, the parents speaking in rapid Italian, while their children pointed excitedly at the departure boards. Everyone around me seemed to have somewhere important to go, someone waiting for them, a purpose that extended beyond this sterile terminal. Meanwhile, I sat abandoned with a business degree I'd worked 3 years to earn, and a family that had just demonstrated exactly how little my achievements meant to them. My phone buzzed with notifications from the family group chat that I apparently was no longer part of. Through the message preview, I could see Linda posting photos of their boarding passes with heart emojis, Madison's selfie with a Paris "Here we come" caption, and Ryan's video of the gate area with excited commentary about the business class seats Dad's company had supposedly provided. The seats that didn't include one for me. I scrolled back through our conversation history, looking for any indication that this betrayal had been planned. 3 weeks ago, Linda had sent the group message about the trip details, mentioning 5 tickets and asking everyone to clear their schedule. 2 weeks ago, she'd asked for our passport information and meal preferences. 1 week ago, she'd shared the hotel booking confirmation for the family suite at the Georges Fieris in Paris. At no point had anyone mentioned that I wouldn't actually be going. The more I thought about it, the more calculated this felt. Linda had insisted we all ride together to the airport in her SUV, claiming it would be more convenient than taking separate cars. She'd suggested we arrive 3 hours early to account for international travel procedure. She'd even reminded me twice to pack light, since we'd be doing a lot of walking in Paris. Every detail designed to maximize the humiliation of this moment. My father's reaction had been the most devastating part. When Linda announced the ticket shortage, I'd looked directly at him, waiting for him to intervene, to insist that his daughter's graduation celebration trip shouldn't be derailed by some corporate booking error. Instead, he'd avoided my eyes and mumbled something about trying to get me on a later flight, though we all knew the trip was only a week long and finding last-minute international flights would be nearly impossible. Maybe this is for the best, he'd said finally, still not meeting my gaze. You could use this time to start job hunting seriously. Your degree won't help if you don't put it to work. The comment had stung particularly because I'd already been interviewing for positions, including several promising opportunities that I'd had to reschedule around this family trip. I'd graduated summa cum laude, been inducted into the Business Honor Society, and completed an internship at a prestigious consulting firm. But none of that seemed to matter when weighed against Linda's desire to take her own children on a European adventure, using my father's corporate travel benefits. I pulled up my banking app, calculating whether I could afford to book my own last-minute flight to Paris. My savings account showed $3,247, most of which I'd been planning to use for apartment hunting and interview travel once we returned from the trip. A quick search showed flights to Paris starting at $200 for tomorrow, assuming I could even get a seat. By the time I added hotel costs, since I obviously wouldn't be welcome in their family suite, I'd be looking at most of my savings for a shortened trip where I'd spend every day, knowing my family had actively excluded me. The departure board updated, showing their flight status changed to board. I imagined them settling into their business class seats, Linda probably already posting Instagram stories about their luxurious travel experience, while Dad distributed the French phrase books he'd insisted on buying for everyone. Everyone except me. My phone rang, and for a moment my heart leaped, thinking perhaps Dad had reconsidered and was calling to figure out how to get me on the flight. Instead, my best friend Chloe's name appeared on the screen. "Emma, how's the airport? Are you excited about Paris?" Chloe's enthusiastic voice made my throat tighten with unshed tears. "I'm not going," I managed to say, my voice cracking slightly. "They left me here." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. "What do you mean they left you? Did you miss the flight?" I explained the entire humiliating situation while watching their gate area from across the terminal. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the massive Boeing 777 being prepared for departure, knowing my family was somewhere inside while I sat alone in the terminal. "That's absolutely horrible," Chloe said when I finished. "I can't believe Linda orchestrated this whole thing, and your dad just went along with it." He looked embarrassed, but not embarrassed enough to actually stand up for me, I replied bitterly. I think he was relieved to avoid a confrontation with Linda, even if it meant sacrificing his own daughter's feelings. "What are you going to do now? Do you want me to come pick you up?" I considered the offer. Chloe lived downtown and had been my closest friend since our freshman year at Northwestern. She'd witnessed enough of my family drama over the years to understand exactly how devastating this betrayal felt. But the thought of driving back to my cramped studio apartment near campus, unpacking the clothes I'd carefully selected for European sightseeing, and spending the next week explaining to people why I wasn't in Paris, felt overwhelming. "I think I need to sit here for a while and process this," I told her, "maybe walk around the airport and clear my head." "Okay, but call me if you change your mind. And Emma, your family is completely wrong about this. What they did is inexcusable." After ending the call, I stood up and began walking aimlessly through the terminal. O'Hare was massive, with terminals connected by underground tunnels and moving walkways that created a small city beneath the runway. I'd been through here dozens of times over the years for various trips, but never as a stranded passenger with nowhere to go. I found myself gravitating toward the international terminal, where families said tearful goodbyes and business travelers hurried between gates with phones pressed to their ears. The energy here felt different from domestic travel, charged with the excitement and anxiety of long journeys to distant places. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A place I should have been heading if my family had possessed even basic decency. Near the food court, I overheard a conversation between two gate agents discussing a last-minute cancellation on a flight to London. For a wild moment, I considered approaching them, asking if I could take the seat. I had my passport, I had some savings, and I had absolutely nothing waiting for me back in Chicago, except the humiliation of explaining this situation to everyone who knew about our family trip. But even as I entertained the fantasy, I knew it was impractical. I didn't have a visa for an extended stay in Europe, I didn't have accommodations booked, and I certainly didn't have the emotional energy to navigate international travel alone while processing this betrayal. Instead, I bought an overpriced coffee and found a quiet corner where I could continue wallowing in self-pity. My phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. Linda had posted a photo of their champagne service in business class, tagged with "living our best life," and several airplane emoji. The comments were already rolling in from her friends and colleagues, offering heart-eye emojis and remarks about how lucky her family was. I noticed she'd tagged my father and both Ryan and Madison, but conspicuously left me out, making it appear to anyone following our family that I simply hadn't been part of the trip at all. The exclusion felt deliberate and cruel, designed to erase me from their narrative entirely. Anyone looking at her social media would assume this was always meant to be a trip for just the four of them, rather than a celebration that had been planned around my graduation. Linda was rewriting history in real time, transforming my absence from a betrayal into a natural omission. I scrolled through the comments, recognizing names of family friends and my father's colleagues. Several people mentioned how wonderful it was that Dad was taking time to travel with his children, using language that suggested they believed this was a reward for Ryan and Madison's academic achievements, rather than a trip that had been planned to celebrate Mom. David's kids are so lucky to have such involved parents, read one comment from his business partner. Beautiful family vacation. The kids must be thrilled, added another from our next-door neighbor. Each comment felt like another small knife, reinforcing the narrative that I wasn't really part of this family, that Linda's children were his real priorities while I was merely an obligation to be managed when convenient. The fact that none of his friends or colleagues seemed surprised by my absence suggested this dynamic was more apparent to others than I'd realized. I closed Instagram and opened my email, thinking perhaps I should use this unexpected free time productively by following up on job applications or scheduling interviews. My inbox contained the usual mixture of promotional emails, LinkedIn notifications, and automated responses from companies where I'd submitted applications. Nothing that required immediate attention, nothing that would distract me from the growing knot of anger and hurt in my stomach. A group of teenagers walked past, clearly on their way to some exciting destination based on their matching t-shirts and enthusiastic chatter. They reminded me of family trips from my childhood, before Dad remarried, when it was just the two of us exploring new cities and creating memories that didn't have to be carefully curated around anyone else's children. Those trips had felt natural and joyful, driven by genuine desire to spend time together rather than obligatory family bonding exercises. The contrast between those memories and this morning's betrayal was stark. Dad had once been the parent who surprised me with weekend trips to museums, who took me to business conferences when I expressed interest in his work, who made me feel like his partner in adventure rather than a burden to be managed. Linda's influence had gradually eroded that relationship, replacing spontaneous father-daughter activities with carefully structured family events, where her children's needs always took precedence. I remembered the conversation we'd had just last month about my post-graduation plan. I'd shared my excitement about potential job opportunities, mentioned my interest in consulting or corporate strategy roles, talked about my desire to travel and gain international business experience. Dad had seemed genuinely proud of my achievements and supportive of my ambition. The idea that he'd used this very trip as an opportunity to exclude me while rewarding his stepchildren felt like a fundamental betrayal of that conversation. My coffee had grown cold while I'd been lost in thought. I checked the time and realized their flight would be taking off soon. Part of me wanted to watch from the terminal windows, to witness the physical moment of their departure, but the masochistic impulse felt unhealthy. Instead, I decided to explore more of the airport, maybe find a bookstore where I could lose myself in someone else's story for a while. The airport bookstore was surprisingly well stocked, with sections dedicated to business books, travel guides, and popular fiction. I gravitated toward the business section, running my fingers along the spines of books about leadership, entrepreneurship, and corporate strategy. These were the subjects I'd spent the past 3 years studying, the foundations of the career I was hoping to build. Yet standing here surrounded by theories about organizational behavior and strategic thinking, I felt completely unprepared to handle the politics of my own family. I picked up a book about family business dynamics, wondering if it might offer insights into navigating the complex relationships that had led to this morning's disaster. The first chapter discussed the challenges faced by children from previous marriages in blended family businesses, the delicate balance between biological loyalty and step-family integration. The academic language made my situation feel both more universal and more hopeless. Apparently, being marginalized by step-parents in favor of their biological children was common enough to warrant entire chapters in business school textbooks. A couple approached the travel guide section nearby, excitedly discussing their upcoming trip to Italy. The woman held a guidebook while the man pointed at various destinations on a fold-out map. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and for a moment I felt a pang of envy for their uncomplicated joy. No family drama, no last-minute betrayals, just two people excited about exploring a new country together. "We have to see the Sistine Chapel," the woman was saying, "and the Trevi Fountain. Oh, and that little gelato place your sister recommended. Don't forget about the cooking class in Tuscany," the man replied. "That's going to be amazing." Their easy partnership made me think about what I'd been looking forward to in Paris. I'd researched museums and galleries, made notes about architectural sites I wanted to photograph, even downloaded a language learning app to brush up on my basic French. The planning had been part of the excitement, imagining myself walking along the Seine, or sitting in a sidewalk cafe with my family, celebrating not just my graduation, but this new chapter of my life. Now all that anticipation felt wasted, transformed into another source of disappointment. The guidebook I'd bought weeks ago was still sitting on my nightstand, bookmarked with pages about the Louvre and Montmartre. My French vocabulary app would send notifications for lessons I'd no longer need. Even my carefully selected outfits, hanging in my suitcase back home, would serve as daily reminders of opportunities stolen by my family's selfishness. I returned the business book to its shelf and wandered toward the magazine section. The latest issues of travel publications featured stunning photography of European destinations, their covers promising insider guides to hidden gems and local experiences. One magazine had a cover story about Paris in the spring, with a photograph of cherry blossoms blooming near the Eiffel Tower. It was exactly the kind of scene I'd hoped to capture during our trip, the perfect backdrop for family photos that would commemorate this milestone in my life. Instead, Linda would be taking those photos with her own children, probably posting them with captions about their amazing family adventure. Ryan and Madison would return to school with stories about European travel, enhanced by the business class experience their mother had secured for them using my father's corporate benefit. They'd have memories and experiences that were supposed to be part of my graduation celebration, while I'd have nothing but the humiliation of explaining why I'd been left behind. The unfairness of it all settled in my chest like a physical weight. I'd worked incredibly hard for my MBA, maintaining a demanding course schedule while working part-time to cover living expenses that my father's child support didn't quite cover. I'd sacrificed social opportunities and weekend plans to maintain my academic performance, motivated partly by the desire to make Dad proud and prove that his investment in my education was worthwhile. Linda's children, meanwhile, had sailed through their undergraduate programs with the kind of financial support I'd never received. Their tuition was fully covered, their living expenses generous, their spring break trips to Cancun and Aspen documented extensively on social media. They'd never had to choose between buying textbooks and groceries, never had to skip social events because they couldn't afford the entrance fees, never had to explain to professors why they needed extensions due to work obligations. Yet somehow, in this moment, their needs had been prioritized over mine. The trip that was supposed to celebrate my achievements had been transformed into their reward for simply existing as Linda's biological children. The cosmic injustice of it made my hands clench into fists. My phone rang again, this time showing my father's number. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Perhaps he'd realized the magnitude of this betrayal. Perhaps he was calling from the plane to insist that Linda figure out how to get me on the next flight to Paris. Perhaps parental loyalty had finally overcome his desire to avoid conflict with his wife. "Hello?" I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Emma, sweetheart, I just wanted to check that you made it home safely." His voice sounded distant, probably calling from the airplane phone system. "I'm still at the airport, actually," I said, trying to figure out what to do with myself. A pause. "Right, well, I'm sure you'll find something productive to do with the time. Maybe this is an opportunity to focus on your job search without distractions." The comment stung. Without distractions. As if celebrating my graduation with my family was somehow a frivolous distraction from the serious business of building my career. as if the trip that had been planned around my achievement was actually an impediment to my professional development. "Dad, this was supposed to be my graduation trip," I said, allowing some of the hurt to creep into my voice. "We planned it specifically to celebrate my MBA, I know, and I'm sorry about the confusion with the tickets, but maybe this worked out for the best. You're at such an important stage in your career, and Linda thought you might appreciate having this time to focus on interviews and applications." Linda thought, not him, not his own parental instincts, but Linda's opinion about what was best for his daughter. The fact that he was outsourcing his relationship with me to his wife's judgment felt like the final nail in the coffin of our father-daughter bond. "Did it occur to you to ask me what I thought was best?" I asked, "or to discuss this ticket shortage before we got to the airport?" Another pause. "Emma, I know you're disappointed, but there's no need to be dramatic about this. It's just a trip. There will be other opportunities, just a trip." My graduation celebration, the culmination of 3 years of intensive study, the reward I'd been looking forward to for months, dismissed as just a trip. The casual dismissal of my feelings, the complete absence of acknowledgement that this exclusion was hurtful, made something fundamental shift inside me. "You're right, Dad," I said, my voice growing calmer as a strange clarity settled over me. "There will be other opportunities. Opportunities that don't depend on whether Linda remembers to include me in her plans." "Now, Emma, that's not fair to Linda. She works very hard to include you in family activities." The comment was so divorced from reality that I almost laughed. Linda worked hard to include me, the way dictators worked hard to include opposition voices in their governments, technically present, completely powerless, and ultimately disposable when convenient. "I should let you get back to your flight," I said. "Enjoy Paris. We'll bring you back something nice," he offered, as if a souvenir could compensate for this betrayal. "Don't bother," I replied, and ended the call before he could respond. The finality of hanging up on my father felt both liberating and terrifying. I'd never directly challenged his authority before, never refused his attempts at reconciliation, never allowed my anger to override my desire to maintain family harmony. But sitting in this airport terminal, abandoned and dismissed, I realized that family harmony built on my constant accommodation of others' selfishness wasn't actually harmony at all. I looked around the busy terminal with new eyes. Thousands of people moving through this space every day, each with their own destinations and purposes, most of them probably unaware that they were walking through a facility that would soon play an unexpected role in my own story. Not that I knew that yet. At this moment, I just saw an airport, sterile and impersonal, filled with other people's adventures, while I sat stranded with nowhere to go. But something was stirring inside me, a growing sense that this humiliation might be the catalyst I needed to finally stop accepting the crumbs of affection my family offered while they served full meals to each other. The business education I'd worked so hard to earn had taught me about strategic thinking, about analyzing situations, and identifying opportunities for improvement. Maybe it was time to apply those skills to my own life instead of waiting for others to recognize my worth. I gathered my belongings and stood up, feeling slightly steadier than I had since this morning's disaster began. I might not be going to Paris, but I wasn't going to spend the next week hiding in my apartment, feeling sorry for myself either. This city had opportunities, connections, possibilities that didn't require my family's permission or inclusion. As I walked toward the exit, planning to catch the train back downtown, I noticed a sign for the private aviation terminal. "Executive Air Services," it read, with an arrow pointing toward a discreet entrance that most passengers probably never noticed. The sign triggered a memory from my childhood, something about Dad mentioning that his company occasionally used private flights for important clients or urgent business trips. I'd never thought much about private aviation before. It seemed like something for celebrities and billionaires, not relevant to my middle-class existence. But standing there in this moment of family betrayal and professional uncertainty, I found myself curious about this hidden world that existed parallel to the commercial aviation terminal, where I'd just been abandoned. Without any particular plan, I followed the signs toward the private terminal, thinking maybe I'd get a glimpse of how the other half traveled. The corridor leading to Executive Air Services was quieter than the main terminal, with higher-end finishes and more subdued lighting. It felt like stepping into a different category of travel entirely, one where exclusion and ticket shortages probably weren't common problems. The entrance to the private terminal required a security badge to access, but through the glass doors I could see an elegant lobby that looked more like a high-end hotel than an airport waiting area. Comfortable seating areas, fresh flowers, attendants in crisp uniforms helping well-dressed passengers with their luggage. It was a world away from the plastic chairs and fluorescent lighting of the commercial terminal where my family had just abandoned me. A security guard approached, noticing my lingering presence near the restricted entrance. "Can I help you with something, miss?" he asked politely. "I was just curious about the private terminal," I admitted. "I've never seen anything like this before." He smiled kindly. "It's quite impressive. Are you traveling with someone today?" "No. Actually, I was supposed to be on a commercial flight, but—" I trailed off, realizing how pathetic it would sound to explain that my family had left me behind. "Flight delays can be frustrating," he said sympathetically. "If you're interested in learning more about our services, there's usually someone available at the main desk to answer questions. Though I should mention that our daily rates are probably more than most people want to spend on a single flight." "I'm sure they are," I agreed, but something about his casual mention of rates sparked my curiosity. "What kind of range are we talking about?" "Depends on the destination and aircraft type, but typically anywhere from $15,000 to $50,000 for domestic flights, more for international routes." The numbers were staggering, representing more money than I'd made in my entire part-time work history during graduate school. It emphasized the vast gulf between this world and my own, where I was currently calculating whether I could afford to replace the vacation I'd just lost. But as I thanked the guard and turned to leave, something made me pause. Those numbers, while enormous to me personally, weren't entirely outside the realm of possibility for corporate travel. My father's company was substantial, with international clients and time-sensitive business deals. If they occasionally used private aviation for executive travel, as I vaguely remembered him mentioning, then someone was making decisions about spending that kind of money. Someone was deciding which trips warranted private flights, which executives deserved that level of convenience, which clients merited that kind of impression. Someone was managing relationships with private aviation companies, negotiating contracts, and overseeing budgets that dwarfed my entire educational investment. It was just a passing thought, a momentary curiosity about a business sector I'd never considered before. I had no way of knowing that this casual encounter at the private terminal entrance would prove to be far more significant than my family's betrayal, or that the world I was glimpsing through those glass doors was connected to my life in ways I couldn't possibly imagine. For now, I was simply Emma Chen, recently graduated MBA student, abandoned by her family at Chicago O'Hare, trying to figure out how to salvage some dignity from this humiliating situation. The fact that I was also Emma Chen, beneficiary of a trust fund I'd never been told about, heir to a private aviation empire I didn't know existed, was still hidden beneath layers of family secrets and corporate structures that would soon begin to unravel. But that revelation was still hours away. At this moment, I was just a hurt and angry young woman, walking away from the private terminal with new questions about the aviation industry, and a growing determination to stop letting others define my worth. The journey from victim to owner of this very facility was about to begin, though I wouldn't recognize the significance of this moment until much later. I made my way toward the exit, planning to take the Blue Line train back to downtown Chicago and begin figuring out what to do with the week I'd planned to spend in Paris. The terminal around me buzzed with the usual airport energy, announcements echoing overhead, families reuniting at baggage claim, business travelers hurrying toward their connection. None of them knew they were witnessing the beginning of a story that would transform not just my understanding of my own family, but my entire future. The automatic doors slid open, and I stepped outside into the Chicago morning, breathing in air that smelled of jet fuel and possibility. Behind me, the private terminal continued its discreet operations, serving clients who moved through the world with the kind of confidence and resources I could barely imagine. I had no idea that in just a few hours I would discover that I wasn't just imagining that world from the outside, I was about to inherit it. The train ride back to downtown Chicago gave me 45 minutes to stew in my anger and plan my next move. I pulled out my laptop and began researching job opportunities with a new intensity, driven by the realization that financial independence was my only path to freedom from my family's manipulative dynamic. The corporate strategy positions I'd been casually considering suddenly felt urgent and necessary. My phone buzzed with another Instagram notification from Linda's account. This time, it was a video of Ryan and Madison clinking champagne glasses with the caption, "Celebrating life with my amazing kids." The comments were already accumulating, friends and family members offering congratulations and heart emoji. I noticed that several of Dad's business colleagues had liked the post, probably assuming this was some kind of business achievement celebration, rather than my stolen graduation. I closed Instagram and opened LinkedIn instead, updating my profile with my recent graduation, and beginning to actively network with Northwestern alumni working in consulting and corporate development. If my family wanted to treat me like I was insignificant, I'd prove them wrong by building a career that dwarfed anything they could have imagined for me. By the time I reached my stop in downtown Chicago, I had sent connection requests to 15 industry professionals and scheduled 2 informational interviews for later in the week. The productivity felt good, transforming my anger into actionable steps toward independence. I walked the 6 blocks to my studio apartment near campus, already mentally preparing for a week of intensive job searching. Instead of Parisian sightseeing, my apartment felt smaller than usual when I entered, probably because I'd been psychologically preparing to be away for a week. My suitcase sat by the door, still packed with carefully selected outfits for European travel. The sight of it triggered a fresh wave of disappointment, but I forced myself to unpack methodically, hanging up the dresses I'd planned to wear to Parisian museums and folding away the comfortable walking shoes I'd bought specifically for Cobblestone Street. I was placing my unused passport back in my desk drawer when I noticed an envelope that hadn't been there before. It was thick cream-colored paper with my name written in elegant script across the front. There was no return address and I didn't recognize the handwriting. For a moment I wondered if one of my neighbors had slipped it under my door, but the paper quality suggested something more formal than a casual note. Inside was a letter from a law firm I'd never heard of, Peterson, Williams and Associates, with an address on Michigan Avenue downtown. The letterhead was impressive, suggesting the kind of high-end legal practice that handled major corporate transactions, rather than routine personal matters. "Dear Chain," the letter began, "we represent the estate of your late grandmother, Helen Chain, and need to discuss matters relating to her will that require your immediate attention. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to schedule a meeting regarding assets that have been held in trust pending your 25th birthday." I read the letter 3 times, certain there had been some mistake. My grandmother Helen had died when I was 12, and while I remembered her fondly, I had no recollection of any mention of a trust fund or inheritance. My father had handled all the arrangements after her death, and he'd never mentioned anything about assets being held for me. The letter included a phone number and the name of an attorney, Margaret Williams, who was apparently handling my grandmother's estate. The timing felt surreal. On the same day my family had abandoned me at the airport, I was receiving mysterious correspondence about an inheritance I'd never known existed. I called the number immediately, too curious to wait for business hours. "Peterson, Williams and Associates, this is Margaret Williams speaking. Miss Williams, this is Emma Chain. I just received a letter from your office about my grandmother's estate." "Emma, I'm so glad you called. I've been trying to reach you for several weeks, but the address we had on file was outdated. I finally managed to track down your current information through Northwestern's alumni office. I'm confused," I admitted. "My grandmother died 13 years ago. Why are you contacting me now?" "Because you turned 25 last month, which activated certain provisions in her will. Your grandmother established a substantial trust fund for you, but specified that you couldn't access it until you reached that age and completed your undergraduate education. When our office confirmed your recent MBA graduation, we were authorized to begin the transfer process." My heart started beating faster. "What kind of trust fund?" "It's quite substantial, Emma. I'd prefer to discuss the details in person, but I can tell you that your grandmother was a very successful businesswoman who wanted to ensure your financial security. Are you available to come to our office this afternoon?" I looked around my tiny studio apartment, at the budget furniture I'd assembled myself, and the stack of student loan documents on my desk. The idea that I might have inherited meaningful money from my grandmother seemed impossible, but the lawyer's serious tone suggested this wasn't a prank. "I can be there in an hour," I said. "Perfect. I'll prepare all the relevant documents." "Emma, I should warn you that this information might come as quite a shock. Your grandmother included specific instructions about how and when you should learn about her business holding." The law office occupied an entire floor of a gleaming downtown skyscraper, with panoramic views of Lake Michigan, and furnishings that spoke of serious money. Margaret Williams turned out to be a woman in her 60s with silver hair, and the kind of understated elegance that suggested she dealt with significant wealth on a regular basis. "Please, sit down," she said, gesturing to a leather chair across from her mahogany desk. "Can I offer you some coffee or water?" I accepted coffee mainly because my hands needed something to hold. The office felt intimidating, with its law books and formal photographs of partners with various political figures and business leaders. "Emma, what I'm about to tell you will fundamentally change your understanding of your family's financial situation," Margaret began, opening a thick file folder. "Your grandmother, Helen Chen, was the founder and majority owner of Skyline Aviation Services, one of the largest private aviation companies in the Midwest." I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. My grandmother owned an aviation company, founded it in 1979 with a single aircraft and built it into a business worth approximately $47 million by the time of her death. She was quite remarkable, actually, one of the first Asian American women to establish a major presence in the aviation industry. The numbers were incomprehensible. I'd grown up thinking my grandmother was a retired office worker who lived modestly in a small house near Chinatown. She'd always been kind to me during my childhood visits, but she'd never displayed any signs of extraordinary wealth. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "If she owned a multi-million-dollar company, why didn't anyone ever mention it? Why did my father never tell me about this?" Margaret's expression grew carefully neutral. "According to our records, your father was informed about the trust fund when your grandmother died, but he was also bound by her specific instructions about when and how you should learn about it. She wanted you to establish your own identity and work ethic before gaining access to significant wealth. But I'm 25 now and I just graduated with my MBA." "Exactly, which means you now meet all the criteria she established." Margaret pulled out a thick stack of documents. "Emma, you are the sole heir to your grandmother's stake in Skyline Aviation Services. As of today, you own 63% of the company, making you the majority shareholder, and effectively the owner." The room seemed to tilt slightly. I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to process what she was telling me. This morning I'd been a broke graduate student, abandoned by my family at an airport. Now I was supposedly the owner of an aviation company worth tens of millions of dollars. "This has to be a mistake," I said. "I don't know anything about aviation. I've never even been on a private plane." "Your grandmother anticipated that reaction," Margaret said with a slight smile. "She left you a letter explaining her reasoning." She handed me an envelope with my name written in the same elegant script I remembered from birthday cards and Christmas gifts. Inside was several pages of my grandmother's careful handwriting. "My dearest Emma," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means you have reached 25 and completed your education, just as I hoped you would. I have kept my business success secret from you not out of shame, but out of love." I paused, remembering my grandmother's gentle voice, the way she used to make elaborate dim sum spreads when I visited and tell stories about immigrating to America with nothing but determination and hope. "I founded Skyline Aviation because I believed that transportation was the key to opportunity," the letter continued. "In my generation, we were limited by geography, by the distance between where we were born and where our dreams might take us. I wanted to build something that could eliminate those barriers for others." The letter went on to explain how she'd started with a single small aircraft, providing charter services for businesses that needed to reach remote locations quickly. Over the decades, she'd built relationships with corporate clients, expanded her fleet, and eventually established one of the region's premier private aviation services. "I never told your father the full extent of my holdings, because I saw how money changed people in our community. I watched families destroyed by inheritance disputes, children who became entitled and lazy because they never learned to work for themselves. I wanted something different for you. My hands were shaking as I continued reading. I have watched you grow into a thoughtful, hard-working young woman who treats people with kindness regardless of their social status. You have earned excellent grades through your own effort, you work to support yourself, and you have never assumed that wealth or privilege were your birthright. These qualities tell me you are ready to inherit not just money, but responsibility. The letter concluded with practical instructions about the trust fund and the company, along with contact information for the current CEO, who had been managing operations in my absence from the business. But it also contained something that made my throat tighten with emotion. Emma, you now have choices that I never had as a young woman. You can sell the company and use the money to build whatever life you choose. You can remain a silent partner and pursue other career paths, or you can step into leadership and continue building what I started. Whatever you decide, know that I am proud of the woman you have become, and I trust you to use this gift wisely. I set the letter down and looked up at Margaret, who had been watching me read with patient understanding. This is real, I said, more as a statement than a question. Completely real. I have all the documentation here, including the corporate structure, financial statements, and details about the trust fund. Your grandmother was very thorough in her planning. What exactly does Skyline Aviation Services do now? Margaret pulled out a portfolio of information about the company. They operate one of the largest private aviation fleets in the Midwest, with bases at O'Hare, Midway, and several smaller regional airports. They provide charter services for corporations, wealthy individuals, and government contracts. They also manage aircraft for private owners and provide maintenance service. She showed me photographs of sleek jets and helicopters, facility maps, and organizational charts showing dozens of employees. The scope of the operation was staggering, far beyond anything I could have imagined my quiet grandmother created. The company has been very well managed during the trust period, Margaret continued. The current CEO, James Morrison, was your grandmother's protege and has been running day-to-day operations with the understanding that ownership would eventually transfer to you. The business is profitable and growing. Where is their main facility? Interestingly enough, they operate the private aviation terminal at O'Hare International Airport. Skyline Aviation Services has an exclusive contract to manage all private jet operations there, including the executive terminal you might have seen if you've traveled through O'Hare recently. The coincidence was so perfect it felt like the universe was playing an elaborate joke on me. This morning I'd been abandoned at O'Hare, relegated to the commercial terminal while my family flew to Paris in business class. Now I was learning that I actually owned the private aviation facility at that same airport, the exclusive terminal where the wealthiest travelers departed in luxury while I sat alone in plastic chairs. Can I see the facility? I asked impulsively. Of course. In fact, I'd recommend meeting with James Morrison as soon as possible. He's been eager to brief you on operations once you became aware of your inheritance. Margaret made a phone call while I continued staring at the financial documents spread across her desk. The numbers were extraordinary. The company generated approximately $8 million in annual revenue, with profit margins that would make any business school professor proud. My inheritance wasn't just ownership of an abstract company. It was control of a thriving enterprise that employed dozens of people and served hundreds of high-profile clients. James can meet us at the O'Hare facility in 2 hours, Margaret announced after ending her call. He's very excited to finally meet you. The drive back to O'Hare felt surreal, like returning to the scene of a crime where I'd been the victim only to discover I'd actually been the secret owner all along. Margaret rode with me in a town car she'd arranged, continuing to brief me on various aspects of the business, while downtown Chicago passed by outside the windows. Your grandmother was particularly proud of the employment opportunities she created, Margaret explained. Skyline Aviation has one of the best employee retention rates in the industry, and they've provided career advancement for people who might not have found similar opportunities elsewhere. We passed the terminals where I'd sat abandoned just hours earlier, but this time we continued to a separate entrance marked Private Aviation, Authorized Personnel Only. The security guard who greeted us was the same one I'd spoken with briefly during my earlier exploration, though he showed no recognition as he checked our credentials and waved us through. The private terminal from the inside was even more impressive than it had appeared through the glass door. The lobby featured polished marble floors, contemporary art installations, and seating areas that looked like they belonged in a five-star hotel rather than an airport. Well-dressed travelers moved through the space with the casual confidence of people accustomed to luxury, while uniformed staff attended to their needs with discreet efficiency. James Morrison turned out to be a man in his 50s with the kind of warm professionalism that immediately put people at ease. He met us in the lobby with a broad smile and genuine enthusiasm that made me feel welcome despite my complete inexperience with his industry. "Emma, I can't tell you how wonderful it is to finally meet you," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "Your grandmother spoke about you constantly and I've been looking forward to this day for years." "I'm still processing all of this," I admitted. "Until this afternoon I had no idea my grandmother owned a business, let alone that I'd inherited it. She was very specific about keeping it confidential until you were ready," James explained as he led us through the terminal. "She wanted you to develop your own character and work ethic before learning about the wealth. From what I understand about your academic achievements and work history, her strategy was successful." We toured the facility systematically, starting with the client services area where travelers could wait in comfort while their flights were prepared. James explained how the private aviation industry worked, from flight planning and aircraft maintenance to catering and ground transportation coordination. "We handle everything for our clients," he said as we watched a crew preparing a sleek Gulfstream jet on the tarmac. "They arrive, we take care of their luggage and any special requests, and they board directly without the hassles of commercial aviation. No security lines, no boarding delays, no lost luggage." The contrast with my morning experience in the commercial terminal was stark. Here, travel appeared effortless and dignified, designed around the convenience and comfort of passengers who could afford to pay premium prices for personalized service. "How many aircraft does the company own?" I asked as we observed the ground operation. "We own 12 aircraft outright, from smaller jets for regional travel up to large cabin aircraft for international flights," James replied. "We also manage another 30 aircraft for private owners who don't want to handle the operational complexities themselves." We moved through various departments, meeting employees who ranged from pilots and mechanics to customer service representatives and administrative staff. Each person James introduced me to seemed genuinely enthusiastic about their work and proud of the company's reputation in the industry. In the maintenance hangar, I watched technicians working on a beautiful helicopter, while James explained the rigorous safety standards and certification requirements that governed their operations. The precision and expertise required to keep these aircraft operational was impressive, requiring specialists in everything from avionics to engine repair. "Your grandmother always emphasized that our reputation depended entirely on safety and reliability," James said as we observed the maintenance operations. "We've never had a major incident in over 40 years operation, which is extraordinarily rare in this industry." The business offices occupied a separate wing of the facility, with conference rooms for client meetings and administrative spaces for the various departments that kept operations running smoothly. James showed me financial reports, client contracts, and strategic planning documents that demonstrated the company's strong position in a competitive market. "We're currently exploring expansion opportunities," he explained, as we reviewed growth projections. "There's demand for additional services, particularly international charter flights and aircraft management for corporate clients. With the right investment, we could easily double our revenue within 5 years." The scale of the opportunity was overwhelming. This wasn't just an inheritance, it was a chance to build something significant, to continue my grandmother's legacy, while creating my own impact in an industry I'd never considered. "What would my role be if I decided to become actively involved?" I asked. "That would be entirely up to you," James replied. "Your grandmother structured the ownership to give you complete control. You could remain a silent partner and let me continue running operations. You could gradually learn the business and take on increasing responsibilities, or you could sell your stake and use the capital for other ventures. What would you prefer?" James smiled. "Honestly, I'd love to have you involved. Your business education would be incredibly valuable as we consider expansion strategies, and your grandmother always believed that family ownership provided stability that corporate investors couldn't match. We concluded the tour in James's office, which featured a wall of photographs documenting the company's history from its humble beginnings to its current status as a major regional player. I recognized my grandmother in several of the older photos, looking professional and confident as she posed with various aircraft and business partners. She was ahead of her time in many ways, James said, noticing my attention to the historical photo. When she started this business, there were very few women in aviation, and even fewer Asian American entrepreneurs in any industry. She faced tremendous skepticism and discrimination, but she never let it stop her. Looking at those photos, I began to understand something about my grandmother that I'd never recognized during my childhood visits. She hadn't just been a kind woman who made excellent dumplings and gave thoughtful birthday gifts. She'd been a pioneering entrepreneur who'd built something lasting in a challenging industry, who'd created opportunities for others while establishing financial security for her family. "I need some time to think about all of this," I said finally. "Of course," James replied. "This is a lot to absorb in one day, but Emma, I want you to know that whatever you decide, your grandmother chose well. The business is in excellent shape, the employees are dedicated, and the industry outlook is positive. You have options that most people could never imagine." As Margaret and I prepared to leave, James handed me a key card and a business card with his direct contact information. "This will give you access to the facility anytime you want to visit," he said. "And please don't hesitate to call if you have any questions, no matter how basic they might seem." During the drive back downtown, I sat in stunned silence, while Margaret handled some phone calls related to the trust fund transfer. The key card sat in my palm, a tangible symbol of ownership over something I'd never expected to possess. My phone buzzed with another notification from Linda's Instagram account. This time it was a photo of her and Dad at what appeared to be a Parisian cafe, both of them smiling over wine glasses with the caption, "Living our best life in the city of light." The image that would have devastated me this morning now felt merely annoying, like a mosquito buzzing around someone who'd just discovered they owned the entire garden. I thought about texting Dad to tell him about the inheritance, to share this incredible news that would fundamentally change our family's financial dynamics. But something held me back. The way he'd dismissed my feelings this morning, the ease with which he'd allowed Linda to exclude me from their trip, suggested that immediate forgiveness might not be wise. Instead, I found myself thinking about what my grandmother had written in her letter about money changing people, about inheritance disputes destroying family. Maybe there was wisdom in keeping this information private for now, in taking time to understand what I'd inherited before revealing it to people who had just demonstrated that they were willing to exclude me when it suited their convenience. "Margaret," I said as we approached downtown, "who else knows about this inheritance?" "Officially, just the legal team, James Morrison, and a few key employees at Skyline Aviation who were aware of the ownership structure. Your father was notified about the trust fund's existence when your grandmother died, but he wasn't given details about the company's value or your specific inheritance timeline. So he knows I inherited something but not what or how much." "Correct. Your grandmother's instructions were very specific about maintaining confidentiality. You were ready to take control." I considered this information as we pulled up to my apartment building. My father knew I'd inherited something from my grandmother, but he'd never mentioned it to me. Another secret, another piece of information withheld to maintain some version of family harmony that apparently didn't include honest communication. "I'd like to keep this confidential for now," I told Margaret as I prepared to get out of the car. "I need time to process everything and decide how I want to handle the family dynamics." "That's entirely your choice," she assured me. "The legal documentation will take several weeks to complete anyway, so you have time to consider your options." Back in my studio apartment, I spread the inheritance documents across my small dining table and tried to comprehend the magnitude of what had just happened. This morning I'd been worried about student loan payments and entry-level salary. Now I was looking at financial statements that showed monthly profits exceeding what I'd expected to earn in my first year out of graduate school. The irony of the situation was almost too perfect to believe. My family had abandoned me at an airport, treating me like I was financially dependent and professionally irrelevant. In reality, I now owned the most exclusive part of that same airport, the facility that catered to exactly the kind of wealthy, successful people they were probably trying to impress during their Parisian vacation. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts, stopping at Chloe's number. She'd been my closest friend through graduate school, the person who'd witnessed my family's gradual exclusion tactics and offered support when I doubted my own perceptions of their behavior. Emma, how are you holding up? Did you decide what to do about the Paris situation? Chloe, you're not going to believe what just happened to me today. I spent the next hour explaining everything, from the mysterious letter to the law office meeting, to the tour of the private aviation facility. Chloe listened with increasingly amazed interjections, occasionally asking me to repeat details that seemed too extraordinary to be true. Wait, so you actually own the private jet terminal at O'Hare? She asked when I finished. Like, own it, own it. Apparently, along with a whole fleet of aircraft and $47 million worth of business assets. Emma, this is insane. This morning you were devastated about being left behind on a family trip. And now you could probably buy your own airline. I know. I keep expecting someone to call and tell me there's been a mistake, that the inheritance was actually meant for some other Emma Chan. But you've seen the legal documents. This is all legitimate? The lawyers seem very convinced and the business is definitely real. I toured the facility and met with the CEO. It's not some elaborate scam. Chloe was quiet for a moment, presumably processing the implications. What are you going to do? Are you going to tell your family? I don't know. Part of me wants to call Dad right now and tell him exactly what he and Linda can do with their exclusion tactics. But another part of me thinks my grandmother was smart to keep this secret for so long. Your family just proved they're willing to treat you badly when they think you're financially vulnerable, Chloe pointed out. Maybe it's worth seeing how they behave when they still think you need them, versus how they'll act once they know you're independently wealthy. That's exactly what I was thinking. My grandmother's letter talked about money changing people and destroying families. Maybe I should take some time to understand what I've inherited before I reveal it to people who just demonstrated questionable loyalty. Plus, Chloe added with a hint of mischief in her voice, there's something poetic about them abandoning you at an airport that you actually own. They have no idea how badly they miscalculated. We talked for another hour about the practical implications of the inheritance, from tax considerations, to career decisions, to the simple logistics of learning to manage a business I'd never known existed. By the time we ended the call, I felt more grounded in the reality of my situation, though no less amazed by the day's revelations. I spent the evening reading through the company's financial reports and strategic planning documents, trying to understand the industry I'd suddenly entered. Private aviation, I learned, was a complex business that required expertise in everything from federal regulations to customer service to aircraft maintenance. It wasn't something I could manage casually as a side project. If I wanted to be involved, I'd need to commit to learning the business thoroughly. But as I read about route planning and fuel costs and client acquisition strategies, I found myself genuinely interested in the challenges and opportunities. This wasn't just an inheritance, it was a chance to continue building something meaningful, to honor my grandmother's legacy while creating my own impact in the world. My phone buzzed with another update from my family's Parisian adventure. This time a group photo of all four of them at what appeared to be a fancy restaurant. They looked happy and relaxed, completely unaware that their treatment of me had just been rendered cosmically irrelevant. Tomorrow they'd wake up in Paris, probably assuming I was sitting in my apartment feeling sorry for myself and regretting my inability to afford international travel. Instead, I'd be waking up as the owner of a multi-million-dollar aviation company, with decisions to make about aircraft acquisitions and strategic partnerships, and employee compensation plans. The transformation from excluded family member to business owner had happened so quickly that I was still adjusting to the new reality. But one thing was becoming clear as I reviewed the inheritance documents and planned my next step. My family's betrayal this morning had been painful, but it had also been liberating. It had forced me to stop depending on their approval and recognition, to start thinking about my own path forward. Now that path led through an industry I'd never considered, toward opportunities I'd never imagined, with resources I'd never expected to control. My grandmother had given me more than just money. She'd given me choices, independence, and the chance to build something lasting. Tomorrow I would begin learning what it meant to own an aviation company. Tonight I would fall asleep as Emma Chen, graduate student and abandoned daughter. But I was already transforming into someone else entirely. Emma Chen, business owner, aviation executive, and woman who would never again allow others to determine her worth based on their convenience. The key card to the private aviation terminal sat on my nightstand, catching the light from my bedside lamp. Such a small thing, but it represented access to a world I was just beginning to understand, opportunities I was just starting to explore, and a future that belonged entirely to me. I arrived at the Skyline Aviation facility at 7 in the morning, determined to use every available hour to understand the business I'd inherited. The early timing meant I could observe the pre-dawn flight preparations, when the most time-sensitive corporate travelers departed for East Coast meetings. James had mentioned that these early morning operations were particularly profitable, serving executives who needed to arrive in New York or Boston before the market opened. The security guard, whose name I learned was Robert, greeted me with surprised recognition when I presented my access card. Yesterday he'd seen me as a curious tourist, asking questions about the private terminal. Today I was returning as the actual owner, though he didn't know that yet. "Back again, miss? Did you decide to book a flight with us?" "Something like that," I replied, not ready to explain my new role to anyone beyond the senior management team. "I'm meeting with Mr. Morrison to learn more about the operation." I found James in the operations center, a bustling room filled with monitors displaying flight tracking information, weather data and aircraft status report. 3 dispatchers worked at computer terminals, coordinating departure times, and communicating with pilots about route planning and fuel requirements. The complexity of managing multiple simultaneous flights was immediately apparent. "Emma, perfect timing," James said when he spotted me. "We have 6 departures scheduled between now and 9 o'clock, so you'll get to see how we handle our peak morning operations." Over the next 2 hours, I watched the coordinated effort required to manage private aviation service. Each flight involved multiple team members, customer service representatives, ensuring clients had everything they needed, ground crew, handling luggage and aircraft preparation, catering staff delivering customized meal services, and maintenance technicians conducting pre-flight inspection. The attention to detail was remarkable. For one departure to Miami, the customer service team had arranged for the client's specific brand of bottled water, had their car detailed while they flew, and coordinated with their Miami-based assistant to ensure ground transportation would be waiting. Another flight to Denver required special handling for a client's elderly dog, including climate-controlled cargo arrangements and coordination with a veterinarian at the destination airport. "Every client has different needs and expectations," James explained, as we watched a Gulfstream G50 taxi toward the runway. "Part of our value proposition is anticipating those needs and handling details they shouldn't have to worry about." The passengers boarding that particular aircraft were 3 business executives, in expensive suits, moving with the casual confidence of people accustomed to luxury travel. One of them was speaking into a phone about quarterly earnings while boarding, never breaking stride or lowering his voice. The assumption of privacy and convenience was total. "What do flights like that typically cost?" I asked. "For a round trip to Denver on that aircraft, probably around $28,000, James replied. "The clients are partners at a major law firm. They fly with us twice a month for meetings with a client who's based there." The numbers were staggering when multiplied across multiple daily flights. I was beginning to understand how my grandmother had built a multi-million-dollar business by catering to clients who valued time and convenience over cost considerations. In the customer lounge, I observed the kind of service that justified those premium prices. Clients worked on laptops in comfortable seating areas, while staff members handled their travel logistics, from car service coordination to restaurant reservations at their destinations. One executive was having his shoes shined while reviewing documents for his meeting. Another was receiving a massage in a private room designed specifically for relaxation, before long flights. We employ a full-time concierge staff, James noted as we watched these interactions. They handle everything from dinner reservations, to theater tickets, to hotel booking. For many of our regular clients, we function as their personal travel department. The business model was becoming clear. This wasn't just about aircraft transportation, it was about providing a comprehensive luxury experience that removed every possible friction from high-stakes business travel. Clients paid premium prices not just for faster transportation, but for the peace of mind that came with knowing every detail would be handled professionally. I spent time with different departments throughout the morning, learning about various aspects of the operation. In the maintenance hangar, I met Sarah Collins, the chief mechanic, who explained the rigorous inspection and repair procedures required to keep the aircraft airworthy. Your grandmother was obsessive about safety standards, Sarah told me, as she showed me the detailed maintenance logs for each aircraft. She always said that our reputation depended on never having to explain why we cut corners on safety procedures. Sarah had been with the company for 15 years, having started as an apprentice mechanic shortly after graduating from an aviation technical school. Her progression to chief mechanic reflected the kind of career advancement opportunities that James had mentioned as one of my grandmother's priorities. Mrs. Chen gave me opportunities that I never would have found at larger aviation companies, Sarah continued. She believed in promoting from within and investing in employee development. Half of our senior staff started in entry-level positions and worked their way up. The company's human resources philosophy was clearly intentional and successful. As I met various employees throughout the morning, I heard similar stories of career advancement, skills development, and loyalty to an organization that had invested in their professional growth. The employee retention rates that Margaret had mentioned made sense in this context. In the customer service department, I met Maria Santos, who had been managing client relationships for 8 years. She walked me through the customer database, showing me the detailed profiles maintained for each regular client. Miss Patterson always requests sparkling water, but no ice, she explained, pointing to notes in one client's file. Mrs. Hoffman travels with her 2 cats and requires specific carrier configurations. The Richardson family needs car seats for their 3 children whenever they travel. The level of personalization was extraordinary, representing thousands of individual preferences and requirements tracked systematically to ensure consistent service quality. This wasn't just luxury, it was highly sophisticated customer relationship management that created genuine value for busy executives. How do you keep track of all these details? I asked. Your grandmother invested in a custom software system that tracks every interaction with each client, Maria replied. We know their travel patterns, their preferences, their business schedules, even their family situations. When they call, we already know what they're likely to need. The technology infrastructure supporting the operation was more sophisticated than I'd expected. Beyond the customer relationship management system, the company used advanced software for aircraft scheduling, maintenance tracking, fuel cost optimization, and regulatory compliance. My grandmother had clearly understood that efficiency and reliability required significant investment in information systems. During lunch, James introduced me to several pilots who worked regularly for Skyline Aviation. Unlike commercial airline pilots who followed rigid schedules and standardized procedures, these aviators dealt with constantly changing itineraries and unique client requirements. Yesterday I flew a family to their daughter's college graduation in North Carolina, waited 4 hours, then brought them back the same day, explained Captain Lisa Wong, who had been flying for the company for 6 years. Today I'm taking a corporate team to 3 different cities for site visits, with meetings scheduled down to 15-minute intervals. The flexibility required to accommodate such varied demands was significant, and it became clear that pilot recruitment and retention was crucial to the company's success. These weren't just technically qualified aviators, they were customer service professionals who happened to fly airplanes. Your grandmother always emphasized that we're in the service business first, aviation second, Captain Wong continued. Our job is to make our clients' lives easier, and flying is just one component of that. In the afternoon, James arranged for me to observe a flight planning session, where dispatchers coordinated routes, fuel stops, and timing for a complex multi-day trip. The client was a pharmaceutical executive who needed to visit manufacturing facilities in 3 states over 2 days, with precise timing requirements for each meeting. The planning process involved weather analysis, airspace coordination, fuel cost optimization, and contingency arrangements for potential delays. The dispatchers worked with air traffic control systems, monitored real-time weather updates, and maintained communication with pilots throughout the journey. This particular trip will generate about $45,000 in revenue over 2 days, the lead dispatcher Kevin Martinez explained as he finalized the routing. But the planning and coordination time is significant. We start working on complex itineraries like this a week in advance. The profit margins were clearly substantial, but so were the operational requirements. This wasn't a business that could be managed casually or delegated entirely to others. Success required deep expertise in aviation regulations, weather systems, customer service, and logistical coordination. As the afternoon continued, I began to appreciate the complexity of the industry I'd inherited. Private aviation existed at the intersection of luxury service, technical expertise, and regulatory compliance. Success required excellence in all 3 areas, with little margin for error in any of them. James took me through the financial management systems, showing me how the company tracked profitability for individual flights, managed cash flow for expensive aircraft purchases, and planned for long-term capital investment. The financial sophistication was impressive, reflecting careful management during the years since my grandmother's death. We maintain detailed cost accounting for every aspect of the operation, James explained as we reviewed monthly profit report. Fuel costs, pilot wages, maintenance expenses, insurance premiums, facility overhead. We know the exact profit margin for each flight and each client relationship. The data showed that the most profitable services were regular corporate contracts, where clients booked multiple flights per month. These relationships provided predictable revenue streams and allowed for more efficient aircraft utilization. One-time charter flights were less profitable due to the scheduling inefficiencies and higher customer acquisition costs. We're currently working to expand our corporate contract base, James continued. Companies that use private aviation regularly prefer working with a single provider who understands their needs and can guarantee aircraft availability. The strategic opportunities were becoming clearer. The company had established itself as a reliable provider of premium aviation services, but there was potential for significant growth through expanded marketing to corporate clients and geographic expansion to additional airports. In the late afternoon, I attended a meeting with the company's insurance representative, who was reviewing coverage requirements for the aircraft fleet. The insurance considerations were complex, involving liability coverage for passengers, hull insurance for the aircraft themselves, and professional liability protection for pilots and mechanics. Private aviation insurance is specialized and expensive, the insurance broker explained, but your grandmother always maintained the highest coverage levels available. She understood that a single incident could destroy the entire business if we weren't properly protected. The risk management aspects of the business were sobering. Each flight involved significant liability exposure, from potential aircraft accidents to passenger injuries to property damage. The insurance premiums alone represented hundreds of thousands of dollars annually, but they were essential for protecting the substantial assets I'd inherited. As the evening approached, I joined James for a meeting with our marketing consultant, who was reviewing strategies for expanding the client base. The marketing approaches for private aviation were quite different from typical consumer services, focusing heavily on relationship building and reputation management within specific business community. Our best marketing is word-of-mouth referrals from existing clients, the consultant explained. Business executives talk to each other about service providers, and a strong recommendation from a trusted colleague is worth more than any advertising campaign. The consultant showed me client acquisition data demonstrating that most new business came through referrals from existing clients, partnerships with luxury hotels, and business service providers, and networking within industry associations. Traditional advertising played a minimal role in their marketing strategy. We're planning to expand our presence at business aviation conferences and corporate travel management events, the consultant continued. These venues allow us to build relationships with decision makers, who influence corporate travel policy. The networking requirements were significant, involving participation in industry events, relationship building with corporate travel managers, and ongoing communication with existing clients to encourage referral. It was another aspect of the business that required sustained personal attention rather than automated systems. By the time I left the facility that evening, I had a much clearer understanding of what I'd inherited. This wasn't just a valuable asset that could generate passive income. It was a complex operation that required constant attention, expertise, and relationship management. My grandmother had built something remarkable, but maintaining and growing it would require significant commitment. During the drive back to my apartment, I reflected on everything I'd learned. The business was profitable and well managed, with growth opportunities that could potentially double its value within a few years. But success would require either deep personal involvement in the operation or complete trust in the management team to make strategic decisions on my behalf. The employees I'd met were clearly dedicated and competent, led by James Morrison, who had successfully managed the company's growth during the transition period since my grandmother's death. But ultimate responsibility for major decisions would rest with me as the owner, and those decisions could significantly impact the livelihoods of dozens of employees and the satisfaction of hundreds of clients. My phone showed several missed calls from Dad, along with a text message asking me to call him back. For a moment I considered responding, but I wasn't ready to have that conversation yet. The inheritance had given me perspective on his behavior, but it hadn't resolved the hurt from being excluded from their family trip. Instead, I called Chloe to update her on my day of business education. "So you spent the entire day learning about your aviation empire?" she asked with amusement. "It's more complex than I expected," I replied. "This isn't just about owning valuable assets. There are employees depending on these jobs, clients relying on these services, and regulatory requirements that could shut down the entire operation if we don't maintain compliance." "Sounds like your grandmother left you more than just money. She left you a responsibility." "Exactly. And I'm not sure I'm qualified to handle it. I have an MBA, but I don't know anything about aviation or luxury service management or federal transportation regulation." "But you could learn," Chloe pointed out. "You just spent a day absorbing information about the business, and it sounds like you have a strong management team to work with." James Morrison seems incredibly competent, and the employees are clearly dedicated. But as the owner, I'd be responsible for strategic decisions that could affect everyone's future. "What does your gut tell you? When you were touring the facility and meeting the employees, did it feel like something you could be passionate about?" I considered her question as I walked through my apartment, which felt even smaller after spending a day in the expansive aviation facility. "Actually, yeah. The business challenges are interesting, the employees are impressive, and there's something appealing about continuing what my grandmother started. Then maybe the question isn't whether you're qualified now, but whether you're willing to become qualified." After ending the call with Chloe, I spent the evening researching aviation industry publications and educational programs. If I was going to seriously consider taking an active role in managing Skyline Aviation, I needed to understand the broader industry context and competitive landscape. The private aviation sector, I learned, was growing rapidly as corporate executives increasingly valued time savings and travel flexibility over cost consideration. New competitors were entering the market regularly, but established companies with strong reputations and comprehensive service offerings maintained significant advantages. I found several executive education programs focused on aviation management, offered by universities with strong aerospace engineering and business programs. There were also industry conferences and certification programs that could help me develop the specialized knowledge required to make informed strategic decisions. The learning curve would be significant, but it wasn't insurmountable. With the right educational foundation and mentorship from experienced industry professionals like James, I could potentially develop the expertise needed to lead the company effectively. As I prepared for bed, I realized that my perspective on the inheritance was evolving. Initially, I'd been overwhelmed by the financial implications and surprised by the complexity of the business. Now I was beginning to see it as an opportunity to build something meaningful, to honor my grandmother's legacy while creating my own impact in an industry I'd never considered. The key card to the aviation facility sat on my nightstand, no longer just a symbol of unexpected wealth, but a tangible connection to a business that employed dozens of people and served hundreds of clients. My grandmother had trusted me with more than just money. She'd entrusted me with the continuation of something she'd spent decades building. Tomorrow I would continue my education about the aviation industry, meet with additional employees, and begin to seriously consider what role I wanted to play in the company's future. The decision would affect not just my own career path, but the livelihoods of everyone who depended on Skyline Aviation for their professional success. My phone buzzed with another Instagram notification from Linda's account, this time a photo from what appeared to be a Seine River cruise. The image of my family enjoying their Parisian vacation no longer triggered the sharp pain it had yesterday. Instead, it felt like a reminder of how dramatically my circumstances had changed in just 48 hours. 2 days ago, I'd been a graduate student, worried about entry-level salary negotiations and student loan payments. Now I was the owner of a multi-million-dollar business, making decisions about aircraft acquisitions and employee development programs. The transformation was so complete that their exclusion from their trip felt like ancient history, but I wasn't ready to share this news with them yet. My grandmother's letter had emphasized the importance of character development before inheriting significant wealth, and I was beginning to understand her wisdom. The inheritance had given me options and independence, but it had also given me time to observe how people treated me when they thought I was financially vulnerable. My family's behavior during the airport incident had revealed something important about their priorities and loyalty. Before I revealed my changed circumstances, I wanted to understand whether their attitudes were situational or fundamental. Did they exclude me because they thought I couldn't contribute financially to their lifestyle, or were there deeper issues that money couldn't resolve? The inheritance had given me the luxury of time to explore these questions without the pressure of financial dependence. I could afford to wait, to observe, to make decisions about family relationships based on genuine connection rather than necessity. As I fell asleep, I found myself thinking about my grandmother's journey from immigrant entrepreneur to successful business owner. She'd built something lasting in an industry dominated by men, creating opportunities for employees while providing valuable services to clients. The legacy she'd left me wasn't just financial. It was a model for how to build something meaningful while maintaining strong values and treating people with respect. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and decisions as I continued learning about the aviation business. But tonight, I felt grateful for her foresight in preparing me for this opportunity, and determined to prove worthy of the trust she'd placed in me. The private aviation terminal at O'Hare continued operating through the night, serving clients whose business couldn't wait for morning departure. Somewhere in that facility, the team I was still getting to know was coordinating flights, maintaining aircraft, and providing the luxury service that had made Skyline Aviation successful. In a sense, I was already part of their operation, connected to their success and responsible for their future, even though most of them didn't know it yet. The weight of that responsibility was both intimidating and energizing. My grandmother had given me more than just wealth. She'd given me the opportunity to make a difference in an industry, and in the lives of the people who worked there. How I chose to handle that opportunity would define not just my own future, but the continuation of everything she'd built. 3 days into my intensive education about the aviation business, I received a call from James Morrison that would test everything I'd been learning about leadership and family dynamics. "Emma, we have a situation that requires your immediate attention," he said, his usually calm voice carrying an edge of urgency. "Your father is here at the facility demanding to speak with management about arranging a charter flight from Paris back to Chicago. He's claiming there's been a family emergency, and insisting that we provide immediate service." My stomach dropped. Dad was supposed to be in Paris for another 4 days, which meant something had gone seriously wrong with their vacation. But his presence at my facility, making demands of my employees, created exactly the kind of confrontation I'd been hoping to avoid until I was better prepared. "What kind of emergency?" I asked, already grabbing my keys to drive to O'Hare. "He won't provide details, just keeps saying that Linda is having a medical crisis and they need to return home immediately. He's been here for 2 hours. Progressively becoming more agitated when our customer service team explains that we can't arrange international charter flights with a few hours' notice. Is he being difficult with the staff?" James paused diplomatically. He's been persistent about speaking with whoever has authority to override standard booking procedures. He mentioned that his daughter works in aviation and could help expedite the arrangements. The irony was breathtaking. Dad had abandoned me at this very airport 3 days ago, but now he was invoking my supposed aviation connections to solve his problem. He had no idea that his daughter didn't just work in aviation. She owned the company he was demanding service for. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, I told James. "Please don't reveal my ownership to him yet. I want to handle this carefully." "Understood. Should I move him to a private office?" "Yes." And make sure the staff knows that regardless of any family connections he claims, he should be treated like any other potential client. No special accommodations until we understand the full situation. During the drive to O'Hare, I tried to prepare myself for what would inevitably be an emotionally charged encounter. Dad's presence at Skyline Aviation meant he was desperate enough to pursue options he normally couldn't afford, which suggested Linda's medical issue was serious. But his approach of demanding special treatment, based on fictional family connections, also demonstrated the same entitled attitude that had led to my exclusion from their trip. I arrived at the facility to find Dad pacing in one of the conference rooms, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled and his phone pressed to his ear. Through the glass wall I could see him gesturing emphatically while speaking to someone, probably Linda or one of his business colleagues. "Where is he emotionally?" I asked James before entering the room, frustrated, worried, and increasingly angry that we haven't been able to solve his problem immediately. "He keeps mentioning that money isn't an issue, but our international charter coordinator has explained repeatedly that aircraft availability and regulatory requirements can't be overcome with payment alone. What would it actually take to arrange a Paris to Chicago flight with short notice? For tomorrow departure we'd need an aircraft already positioned in Europe or willing to fly empty to Paris first, plus expedited customs clearance, international flight plan approval and crew rest requirement. Realistically we could probably arrange something for the day after tomorrow, but the costs would be substantial." "How substantial?" "Probably around $120,000, including positioning costs and expedited handling fees." The number would represent a significant portion of Dad's annual income, but it wasn't impossible if Linda's medical situation was genuinely serious. However, his demand for immediate service reflected the same disregard for other people's constraints that had characterized his family leadership. I took a deep breath and entered the conference room where my father was ending his phone call with obvious frustration. "Emma?" He looked genuinely shocked to see me. "What are you doing here?" James Morrison said, "You work in aviation, but I didn't realize you worked at this specific company." "I'm consulting with Skyline Aviation on marketing strategies," I said, which was technically true even if incomplete. "James called me when he heard about your situation." "What's going on with Linda?" Dad's expression shifted from surprise to relief, apparently assuming that my presence meant his problems would be solved immediately. "Linda collapsed yesterday morning in our hotel. The doctors in Paris think it might be a heart issue, but they want to run tests that could take several days. She's terrified of being treated in a foreign hospital and wants to come home immediately." "Is she stable enough to travel?" "The doctors cleared her for flight as long as she remains seated and has access to medical equipment if needed. That's why I need a private aircraft instead of commercial airlines. Commercial flights can't guarantee medical accommodations or privacy for someone in her condition." "I understand the urgency," I said carefully, "but James has explained the logistical challenges of arranging international charter flights with short notice. This isn't a matter of willingness to help. It's about aircraft availability and regulatory requirements." Dad's frustration immediately refocused on, "Emma? I thought you could help expedite this. Your mother always said you were resourceful in crisis situations." The reference to my mother caught me off guard, particularly his implication that she would expect me to solve problems for the family that had just excluded me from their vacation. But it also revealed how automatically he expected me to accommodate his needs, despite his recent treatment of me. "I can help you understand the options," I replied evenly, "but I can't override physics or federal aviation regulation." James joined us in the conference room, carrying a folder of information about potential solutions. "Mr. Chen, I've been working with our international coordinator to explore every possible option. We can definitely arrange a flight, but the earliest departure would be day after tomorrow, and the cost would be approximately $120,000. Dad's face went pale at the financial figure. That's more than half my annual salary. Isn't there something less expensive? The cost reflects the complexity of positioning an aircraft in Paris with short notice, James explained professionally. We'd need to fly an aircraft empty from our base here, coordinate with European aviation authorities, and arrange for specialized medical equipment to be installed. What about commercial options? I asked, genuinely wanting to help despite my anger about their treatment of me. We've explored first-class bookings on major airlines, James replied, but the earliest available seats aren't until next week, and none of the carriers can guarantee medical support beyond basic first aid. Dad slumped in his chair, the weight of the situation clearly overwhelming him. For the first time since their wedding, I saw him as vulnerable rather than demanding, struggling with circumstances beyond his control rather than orchestrating family dynamics to his advantage. What does Linda want to do? I asked. She wants to come home immediately regardless of cost, but she doesn't understand that spending over $100,000 on a single flight would require us to take loans against our retirement savings. The financial reality was sobering. Dad earned a comfortable living, but he wasn't wealthy enough to casually spend six figures on emergency travel. The irony wasn't lost on me that I now had the personal resources to cover the cost without significant impact, but he had no idea about my inheritance. Are there any intermediate options? I asked James. Something between commercial airlines and a full private charter? We could explore partnership with European charter companies who already have aircraft positioned in France, James suggested. The cost would still be substantial, probably around $70,000, but it would reduce the positioning expenses. That's still a huge financial burden, Dad said quietly. I never anticipated needing this kind of money for emergency travel. I found myself facing an unexpected test of character. 3 days ago, this man had stood silently while his wife excluded me from a family vacation, treating me like an inconvenient burden rather than his daughter. Now he was in genuine crisis, needing help that I had the power to provide but he had no right to expect. My grandmother's letter had emphasized the importance of character development before inheriting wealth, and this situation felt like exactly the kind of moral complexity she'd wanted me to navigate thoughtfully. James, could you give us a few minutes alone? I asked. After James left the conference room, I sat across from Dad and tried to organize my thoughts. The power dynamic between us had completely reversed since our last conversation, though he didn't know it yet. Dad, before we discuss solutions, I need to address what happened at the airport 3 days ago. He looked uncomfortable but not surprised. Emma, I know you were disappointed about the trip, but this isn't the time for family disagreements. Linda needs medical attention. This isn't about disappointment, I said firmly. This is about how you treated me when you thought I was financially dependent on your decisions. You stood silently while Linda told me to sleep in my car, then dismissed my feelings when I called you from the plane. That was a misunderstanding about the booking arrangements. No, it wasn't. It was a deliberate exclusion designed to prioritize Linda's children over your own daughter. And now you're here expecting me to solve your problems because you assume I have aviation industry connections that can help you. Dad shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing that his current predicament made him vulnerable to exactly the kind of accountability he'd been avoiding. Emma, I understand you're angry, but Linda's health crisis is more important than our family disagreements. I agree that Linda's health is important, I replied, but my willingness to help doesn't erase the fact that you've demonstrated a pattern of excluding me when it's convenient and including me only when you need something. What do you want me to say? That I should have handled the trip situation different? Fine. I should have communicated better about the booking limitations. His reluctant acknowledgement felt insufficient, but I recognized that crisis situations weren't ideal for processing complex family dynamics. Linda genuinely needed medical attention, and my personal grievances shouldn't interfere with addressing her health concerns. I'll help you explore options for getting Linda home safely, I said finally. But after this crisis is resolved, we need to have serious conversations about how our family operates, and whether you're prepared to treat me as an equal member rather than a convenience. Thank you, Dad said with obvious relief. I know I haven't been the father you deserved lately,
but I promise we'll work on our relationship once Linda is stable. I called James back into the room and asked him to walk us through all available options in detail. The European Charter Partnership could indeed provide a flight within 36 hours for approximately $70,000, with medical equipment available if needed.
Commercial first-class options remained limited, but possible if Linda's condition stabilized enough to tolerate longer travel times and less privacy. What would you recommend for someone in Linda's medical situation? I asked James. Honestly, the private charter provides the safest and most comfortable option, he replied. She'd have complete privacy, medical equipment readily available, and the ability to adjust travel arrangements if her condition changes during the flight. Dad stared at the financial projections, clearly struggling with the implications. $70,000 represented more than a year of mortgage payments, a significant portion of his retirement savings, and far more than he'd ever spent on any single purchase. Could the cost be financed? He asked quietly. We can arrange payment plans for charter services. James confirmed. But the interest rates and terms would need to be negotiated based on your credit qualification and ability to provide collateral. The conversation was becoming increasingly painful to watch. My father, who had always projected financial confidence and control, was being forced to admit the limitations of his resources in front of his daughter, whom he'd recently excluded from a family vacation. Dad, I need to tell you something, I said, deciding that the situation had reached a point where continued secrecy served no one's interests. I have the financial resources to cover Linda's emergency flight, if you're willing to accept help from the daughter you left at the airport 3 days ago. He stared at me in confusion. Emma, you just graduated from business school. You don't have $70,000 in disposable income. Actually, I do, but more importantly, I have something else you don't know about. I paused, realizing that what I was about to reveal would permanently change our family dynamic and my father's understanding of his own decision-making over the past few days. Dad, I own Skyline Aviation Services. The company you've been demanding special treatment from belongs to me. I inherited it from Grandma Helen 3 days ago, the same day you abandoned me at this airport. The silence in the conference room stretched for nearly a minute while Dad processed this information. His expressions cycled through disbelief, shock, realization, and what appeared to be mortification as the implications became clear. You own this company? He asked finally. 63% controlling interest in a $47 million aviation business that operates the private terminal at O'Hare International Airport. I confirmed. The same airport where Linda suggested I sleep in my car because there wasn't room for me in your family vacation. Dad's face went completely pale as the cosmic irony of the situation hit him. Emma, I had no idea. About the inheritance, or about how it would feel to discover that the daughter you excluded actually owned the facility you're now desperately seeking help from. Both, he said quietly. Your grandmother mentioned a trust fund when she died, but she never told me the details. I assumed it was a modest amount for college expenses. She was very specific about keeping the inheritance confidential until I turned 25 and graduated with my degree, I explained. She wanted me to develop my own character and work ethic before learning about the wealth, and I've been treating you like you were financially dependent on my decisions. While I actually had more resources than you could access even in a genuine emergency, the same family that told me to make other arrangements for vacation accommodations is now asking me to spend $70,000 to solve your travel crisis. The power reversal was complete and devastating. Dad sat in stunned silence, apparently realizing that every family decision over the past 3 days had been made from a position of ignorance about our actual relative financial positions. Emma, I don't know what to say. You could start by acknowledging that your treatment of me had nothing to do with financial necessity and everything to do with prioritizing Linda's preferences over your daughter's inclusion in the family. James, who had been observing this revelation with professional discretion, cleared his throat gently. Should I arrange for the European Charter Partnership to transport Mrs. Chen home? I looked at Dad, who was clearly struggling to process the complete transformation of his understanding of our family situation. What do you think, Dad? Should I use my aviation company to rescue the woman who suggested I sleep in my car? Emma, Linda was wrong about the vacation situation, but she's genuinely scared about her health. Whatever our family issues are, she doesn't deserve to suffer because of them. He was right, and I knew. Linda's medical crisis wasn't something she'd chosen, and her fear about receiving treatment in a foreign country was understandable regardless of her recent behavior toward me. James, please arrange the European Charter Partnership flight for tomorrow afternoon, full medical equipment configuration, and I'll personally guarantee payment. Thank you, Dad said, his voice thick with emotion. Emma, I know I don't deserve this kindness after how we treated you. You're right, you don't deserve it. I agree. But Linda deserves medical care, and family members help each other during genuine crises, even when those relationships are complicated. How can I repay you for that? By having honest conversations about how our family operates, and whether you're prepared to treat me as an equal partner in family decisions, rather than someone whose needs can be dismissed when convenient. James excused himself to begin coordinating the flight arrangements, leaving Dad and me alone to process the magnitude of what had just been revealed. I feel like I don't even know who you are anymore, Dad said, finally. I'm the same person I was 3 days ago. I replied. The difference is that now you know I have options and resources that don't depend on your approval or inclusion, and you've chosen to use those resources to help us despite how we treated you. I've chosen to help Linda because she's having a medical emergency. Whether I'm willing to continue having a relationship with family members who exclude me when convenient remains to be determined. Dad nodded slowly, seeming to understand that this conversation was just the beginning of a much larger reckoning about our family dynamic. Can you forgive me for not standing up for you at the airport? I don't know yet, I said honestly, but I'm willing to see whether you've learned anything from discovering that your assumptions about my financial dependence were completely wrong. What happens now? Now you go back to Paris, take care of Linda's medical needs, and prepare for her flight home tomorrow. After she's stable and receiving proper treatment, we'll have more extensive conversations about whether this family can function as an actual family rather than Linda's social experiment. And the cost of the flight. Consider it a gift to Linda's health, not a favor to the family that excluded me from their vacation. There's a difference. James returned with flight confirmation details and medical equipment specifications. The European charter partner could provide a Bombardier Global Express configured with cardiac monitoring equipment and space for a medical attendant, if needed. Departure from Charles de Gaulle Airport was scheduled for the following afternoon, with arrival in Chicago by early evening. The aircraft is equipped with satellite communication systems, so the medical team can maintain contact with her doctors in Chicago throughout the flight, James explained. We've also arranged for an ambulance to meet the aircraft here and transport her directly to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Dad reviewed the arrangements with obvious relief and gratitude, though his continued shock about my ownership of the company remained visible in his expressions and body language. I should get back to Paris to prepare Linda for the travel arrangements, he said finally. Emma, thank you for this. I know I have a lot to make up for. Safe travels, Dad. Take care of Linda, and we'll talk after she's stable. After Dad left for his commercial flight back to Paris, I remained in the conference room with James, both of us processing the emotional intensity of the past few hours. That was quite a family reunion, James observed carefully. More like a family reckoning, I replied. My father just discovered that every assumption he's made about family power dynamics was completely wrong. How do you feel about the way you handled it? I considered the question thoughtfully. I think I balanced helping someone in genuine medical crisis with holding family members accountable for their recent behavior, but this is just the beginning of much larger conversations about how our relationships will work going forward. Your grandmother would be proud of how you managed the situation, James said. She always emphasized that wealth should be used responsibly, especially in crisis situations involving family. Did she ever mention concerns about how my father might react to learning about the inheritance? She worried that your father might have difficulty accepting that his daughter had achieved financial independence beyond anything he could provide, James admitted. She thought the timing restrictions were important partly to ensure you were emotionally prepared for those family dynamics. She was wise to wait until I was 25 and had completed my education. If I'd learned about this wealth at 18, I might not have developed the character to handle today's situation appropriately. The next 24 hours passed quickly as James and I coordinated Linda's medical transport while I continued learning about various aspects of the aviation business. The European charter partnership performed flawlessly, providing regular updates about Linda's condition during the flight and ensuring seamless transfer to the Chicago medical team upon arrival. Linda was admitted to Northwestern Memorial Hospital in stable condition, with her cardiac symptoms attributed to stress and anxiety rather than serious heart disease. The emergency flight had been medically justified, but the underlying issue was manageable with proper treatment and stress reduction. Dad called me from the hospital that evening to provide medical updates and express gratitude for the flight arrangement. The doctors say she should make a full recovery with some lifestyle modifications and stress management, he reported. Emma, I can't thank you enough for making this possible. I'm glad she's going to be okay, I replied sincerely. How is she handling the travel? Better now that she's back in familiar surroundings with doctors she trusts. But Emma, she wants to talk to you. She has some things she needs to say about the airport situation. I'm not sure I'm ready for that conversation yet. I understand, but I think you should know that learning about your inheritance has been as shocking for her as it was for me. She realizes that some of her assumptions about our family finances were very wrong. Dad, Linda's assumptions about family finances weren't the problem. The problem was her willingness to exclude me from family activities, regardless of financial considerations. You're right, and she understands that now. Will you at least consider visiting once she's feeling strong? I agreed to consider it, though I remained skeptical about whether Linda's perspective had genuinely changed, or whether she was simply adjusting her behavior in response to learning about my financial resource. The revelation of my inheritance had fundamentally altered my family's understanding of power dynamics, but it remained to be seen whether those changes would translate into more respectful and inclusive relationships, or simply more strategic efforts to maintain access to my resources. Over the following week, I threw myself into learning more about the aviation business, while my family recovered from their medical crisis and processed the implications of my inheritance. James arranged for me to attend an industry conference in Denver, where I could meet other aviation executives and understand broader market trends. The conference was enlightening, revealing both the opportunities and challenges facing private aviation companies. Industry growth was strong, driven by increasing corporate demand for flexible travel options, but competition was intensifying as new companies entered the market with innovative service models. I participated in panels about family business succession, marketing strategies for luxury services, and regulatory challenges affecting the aviation industry. The expertise I was developing felt substantial and relevant, building confidence in my ability to make informed decisions about the company's future. But most importantly, the conference provided perspective on what my grandmother had accomplished in building Skyline Aviation Service. The respect that other industry professionals showed when discussing her legacy made clear that she'd been a genuine pioneer whose influence extended far beyond our single company. On the flight back to Chicago, I reflected on everything that had changed since my family abandoned me at O'Hare, just 1 week earlier. The inheritance had given me financial independence and business ownership, but it had also revealed fundamental truths about family relationships that money alone couldn't fix. The real test would come in the weeks ahead, as I navigated the continuing complexity of family dynamics while making decisions about my role in the aviation company. Dad and Linda's medical crisis had provided a temporary truce, but the underlying issues about respect, inclusion, and family loyalty remained unresolved. As our aircraft approached O'Hare for landing, I looked down at the airport complex that had been the site of so much recent drama and revelation. The private aviation terminal where I'd been excluded just days earlier was now mine to control, but the family relationships that had made that exclusion possible required more fundamental reconstruction. The inheritance had given me choices and power that I'd never expected to possess. How I used those advantages to rebuild trust and establish healthier family dynamics would determine whether my grandmother's legacy extended beyond financial success to include
the strong family relationships she'd undoubtedly hoped I would maintain. 6 months later, I stood in the executive boardroom of Skyline Aviation Services, looking out at the tarmac where a brand new Gulfstream G650 was being prepped for its inaugural flight. The aircraft represented more than just fleet expansion. It symbolized how dramatically everything had changed since that morning, when my family left me stranded at this very airport. Linda knocked on the door, carrying a folder of documents and wearing the professional attire she'd adopted since joining our customer service team 3 months ago. Her recovery from the cardiac episode had been complete, but more importantly, her perspective on family dynamics had undergone a fundamental transformation. "The Henderson Group contract is ready for your signature," she said, placing the papers on my desk. "James reviewed all the terms and thinks it's one of our best corporate partnerships this year." "Thank you, Linda. How are you feeling about the new protocols?" "Much better. Working here has given me real appreciation for what you've built. I understand now why my assumptions about your capabilities were so wrong." The conversation still felt somewhat awkward, but it reflected genuine progress from the woman who had once suggested I sleep in my car. Linda's employment at Skyline wasn't charity. She'd proven genuinely talented at client relationship management, bringing organizational skills that enhanced our service quality. Dad appeared in the doorway, holding his own set of documents. Since Linda's medical crisis, he'd taken early retirement and joined the company as our business development director, focusing on corporate partnerships and strategic planning. "Emma, the Miller Industries deal just closed," he announced with obvious satisfaction. 15-flight monthly contract, guaranteed for 2 years. That brings our corporate revenue up 23% over last year. "Excellent work, Dad. James mentioned you've been developing relationships with several other potential clients. Your networking strategy has been incredibly effective. Turns out my business contacts were more interested in private aviation than I ever realized." The transformation in our family dynamic had been gradual but profound. Dad's discovery of my inheritance had forced him to confront his assumptions about authority and financial dependency, while Linda's medical emergency had demonstrated that genuine crisis required setting aside petty conflict. More importantly, their employment at Skyline had given them direct experience with the business I'd inherited, eliminating any remaining questions about my qualifications or commitment to the company's success. "Are Ryan and Madison still planning to visit during their spring break?" I asked. "They're both excited to see the operation," Dad replied. "Madison has been researching aviation management programs for her graduate studies, and Ryan is considering internships with aviation companies next summer." The shift in my step-siblings' attitudes had been perhaps the most surprising development. Learning that their stepsister owned a successful business had apparently motivated them to reconsider their own career aspirations, transforming me from excluded family member to potential mentor. James Morrison entered the boardroom carrying the quarterly financial reports, his expression reflecting the satisfaction of someone whose efforts had produced exceptional results. "Emma, I have the numbers you requested for the board presentation," he said, distributing copies of the financial summary. "Revenue is up 37% from this time last year, profit margins have improved across all service categories, and our client satisfaction scores are the highest in company history. What's driving the growth?" "The corporate contract strategy has been incredibly successful, but we're also seeing increased demand for international charter services and aircraft management programs. Your decision to expand the maintenance capabilities has allowed us to serve clients who previously used competitors." The business results reflected strategic decisions I'd made after months of intensive learning about the aviation industry. The MBA education that my family had once dismissed as academic theory had proven invaluable for analyzing market opportunities and developing growth strategies. "The new aircraft should help us capture even more of the long-range charter market," I added, gesturing toward the Gulfstream visible through the window. "Already generating interest," James confirmed. "We have 3 international trips booked for next month, including a corporate delegation to Tokyo and a family vacation to the Mediterranean." Linda looked up from her notes with a slight smile. "Ironically, we're now booking the kind of luxury family trips that I thought were beyond our family's reach 6 months ago." The difference is that we're providing those experiences for other families while building a sustainable business, I replied. Rather than just consuming luxury, we're creating value. Dad nodded approvingly. Your grandmother would be proud of how you've grown the company while maintaining her values about employee treatment and service quality. The mention of my grandmother brought a familiar warmth of connection to the woman whose legacy I'd inherited and expanded. Her trust in my character had proven well-founded, but more importantly, her timing had allowed me to develop the maturity needed to handle both wealth and family complexity. Chloe appeared in the doorway, wearing the marketing coordinator badge she'd earned after joining Skyline 2 months earlier. Her friendship during the initial family crisis had evolved into professional partnership as we developed innovative marketing strategies for private aviation service. Emma, the industry magazine wants to schedule an interview about family business succession in aviation, she announced. They're particularly interested in how you've maintained growth while preserving company culture. What's the angle? Young executives who've successfully inherited established businesses without disrupting operations or employee relationships. Your story fits perfectly with their focus on next-generation leadership. The media attention had been unexpected but generally positive, highlighting Skyline's growth and reputation while examining broader trends in family business management. I'd become something of a case study in how to handle significant inheritance responsibly while maintaining family relationships. Schedule it for next week, I decided, but make sure they understand that success has been a team effort, not individual achievement. As the meeting concluded and everyone returned to their respective responsibilities, I remained in the boardroom, reflecting on the extraordinary journey from abandoned daughter to business owner to family leader. The inheritance had given me financial independence and business ownership, but the real transformation had been learning to claim authority based on competence rather than waiting for others to recognize my worth. My family's exclusion tactics had initially been devastating, but they'd ultimately forced me to discover strengths I might never have developed otherwise. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. Dinner tonight to celebrate the Miller Industries contract. Linda is making her famous lasagna, and Ryan called to congratulate you on the quarterly result. The invitation represented something that would have been impossible 6 months ago, genuine family celebration based on shared success rather than obligatory inclusion in other people's achievement. The difference was that now I was contributing significantly to family prosperity while maintaining my own independence and authority. I looked out at the private aviation terminal that had once symbolized my exclusion from family activity. Now it represented opportunity, employment, and success for multiple family members who'd learned to appreciate both the business and the person who owned it. The Gulfstream taxied toward the runway, carrying clients who trusted Skyline Aviation to handle their most important travel needs. In a few hours they'd arrive at their destination, having experienced the kind of luxury service that my grandmother had envisioned when she started this company decades ago. I gathered my materials and prepared to join the evening flight operations, still finding satisfaction in the hands-on aspects of running the business. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight I'd celebrate with family members who had learned to treat me as an equal partner rather than a burden to be managed. The transformation from sleeping in my car to owning the airport had taken exactly 6 months, but the journey from excluded daughter to respected family leader would continue for years to come. The inheritance had given me resources and opportunities, but character and competence had earned me the family relationships that made success meaningful. As I walked through the terminal toward my car, I passed the commercial aviation gates where my family had abandoned me that morning that now felt like a lifetime ago. The memory no longer triggered pain or anger, instead it reminded me that sometimes the worst moments of exclusion can become the catalyst for discovering your own power. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.